This is the story of how she and her lover were completely ruined, retribution for my wife's betrayal. My wife Emily had always been the life of the party. Her charm, dazzling smile, and ability to connect with anyone made her the center of attention wherever she went. But, as they say, you can't judge a book by its cover. Beneath that perfect exterior, secrets often fester. We had been married for 12 years, and I thought we had a strong relationship. Sure, we had our ups and downs like any couple, but I always tried to make her happy. My work as a carpenter and contractor allowed me to provide a comfortable life for her. So she never had to worry about a thing. Emily spent her time pursuing hobbies, organizing events, and maintaining her social circle. Lately, though, something had shifted. It started with little things, a new perfume she never wore for me, a sudden interest in fitness when she'd always dismissed the gym, and late night meetings with friends I barely knew. I tried to push away my doubts. Emily was beautiful, magnetic, and outgoing. People were naturally drawn to her. But last Thursday, everything changed. She came home late again, smelling faintly of expensive cologne I didn't recognize. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup slightly smudged. I was sitting at the kitchen table when she walked in. "Working late again?" I asked, my tone deliberately casual. "Oh, Dan," she said, flashing her practiced smile as she set her bag down. "You wouldn't believe the day I've had. The catering team botched everything for Karen's party. I had to step in and fix it myself." Karen, her ever-convenient scapegoat. "You smell different," I said, trying to mask the edge in my voice. Emily barely missed a beat. "One of the caterers was wearing way too much cologne. It must have rubbed off on me when I was yelling at him to get his act together." She chuckled, grabbing a glass of water. The excuse was neat, almost too neat. But I didn't press further, yet. Over the next week, I started paying closer attention. Emily's phone, once casually left on the counter, was now glued to her hand or locked away in her purse. She'd laugh at texts and quickly turn the screen away. Friday night, she claimed she had a dinner meeting at La Belle Vie, the most exclusive restaurant in town. A chill ran through me. That restaurant belonged to Andre Laurent, a man known for his lavish lifestyle and reputation as a notorious womanizer. Emily's excitement as she got ready that evening was impossible to miss. She spent over an hour doing her hair and makeup, humming to herself in the mirror. Her dress was one I'd bought her years ago, but had never seen her wear. When I commented on how stunning she looked, she simply said, "It's important to make a good impression in my line of work." As soon as she left, I grabbed my keys, I parked a block away from La Belle Vie, and waited. Sure enough, Emily walked in, laughing and chatting, not with Karen, but with Andre himself. He pulled out a chair for her at a secluded corner table, his hand lingering on her back. I sat there for an hour, watching as they sipped wine, leaned in close, and exchanged smiles that left no room for interpretation. My chest tightened with every passing second. When Emily finally returned home, I pretended to be asleep. She slipped into bed without a word, her phone vibrating softly with what I assumed were Andre's messages. The next day, I started planning. If Emily thought I'd sit back and let her make a fool out of me, she was sorely mistaken. The days that followed were a mix of quiet rage and careful calculation. I didn't confront Emily right away. Instead, I used her complacency against her. She was confident, no arrogant enough to think I wouldn't notice anything. Her phone became a goldmine of information. One night, while she showered, I unlocked it using the pattern I'd memorized from years of watching her absent-mindedly swipe across the screen. There it was, a stream of flirtatious texts from Andre Laurent. The messages were explicit, full of promises of secret rendezvous and thinly veiled insults about me. "Your husband must be blind to let a gem like you go unnoticed," Andre had written. "He doesn't deserve you, Emily. I'll show you what real passion is." I clenched my fists, my jaw tightening as I scrolled through the thread. Emily's responses were no better. She played the role of the neglected wife to perfection, painting me as some oblivious, overworked husband who barely acknowledged her. It was infuriating, but it also gave me clarity. If she wanted to make me out to be the fool, I would play along, for now. I started tracking her movements, noting her excuses and watching for patterns. Most of the time, her work obligations were just cover for meeting Andre at his restaurant or at nearby hotels. She seemed to think her actions were invisible, that I was too wrapped up in my work to notice. But she underestimated me. One Saturday morning, Emily announced she'd be spending the day with Karen, helping her plan some upcoming event. "Oh, Karen again? You're such a good friend," I said with a tight smile. Her face lit up, mistaking my politeness for genuine ignorance. "I try," she replied, kissing me on the cheek before grabbing her purse. As soon as she left, I followed her. She didn't go to Karen's house. Instead, she drove straight to La Belleville, where Andre greeted her at the door. His hand lingered on her waist as he whispered something in her ear that made her laugh, a sound that had grown foreign to me in recent months. They disappeared inside together, leaving me simmering in the parking lot. That evening, when she returned home, I played my part again. "How was Karen's?" I asked casually. "Oh, exhausting," Emily sighed, dropping onto the couch. "She's such a perfectionist, you know? But we made great progress." Her lies were effortless, delivered with the kind of sincerity only a seasoned manipulator could muster. I nodded, swallowing my disgust. Over the next week, I put the final pieces of my plan into place. If Emily thought she was clever, she hadn't seen anything yet. I installed discreet cameras in our home, ones she wouldn't notice unless she looked closely. I planted a voice recorder in her car, hidden beneath the driver's seat. It didn't take long before I had all the evidence I needed: her late-night phone calls to Andre, their whispered plans to meet up, and even the occasional slip where she mocked me for being too busy to notice. But it wasn't enough to catch her. No, I wanted her to feel the weight of her betrayal, to experience the consequences of her actions in the most humiliating way possible. So I contacted Andre's wife. I'd done my research. Andre was married to a stunning French woman named Claudine, who was every bit as charming and poised as Emily. From what I gathered, she was completely unaware of her husband's extracurricular activities. That was about to change. I sent her an anonymous email, attaching screenshots of texts and a few incriminating photos I had taken of Andre and Emily together. I kept the message short and to the point. "Your husband isn't as discreet as he thinks." The response came almost immediately. "Who are you? How do you know this?" "Let's just say I'm someone who understands your pain. Check his schedule next Saturday. You'll find all the proof you need." The trap was set. On that Saturday, Emily once again claimed she had a work meeting downtown. She didn't know that I had taken the day off to follow her. This time, I wasn't the only one watching. Claudine had hired a private investigator, and the two of us sat in a parked car outside La Belleville, waiting for the show to start. Emily and Andre arrived separately, but their interaction was anything but subtle. He pulled her into an embrace as they entered through the back door. Claudine's face was a mask of cold fury, but she didn't make a move yet. After about an hour, they emerged from the restaurant, laughing and holding hands. That's when Claudine stepped out of the car. "Excusez-moi, Andre," she called, her voice icy. Andre froze, his face draining of color as he turned to see his wife. Emily, caught off guard, stammered something incoherent, but Claudine cut her off. "I see you've been keeping yourself busy," Claudine said, her eyes narrowing. "Don't bother coming home tonight, or ever." Emily looked to Andre for support, but he was too stunned to respond. That's when I stepped out of the car. "Oh, don't mind me," I said, walking toward them. "I just thought it was time you both faced the music." The look on Emily's face was priceless, a mix of shock, guilt, and panic. Emily's shock lasted only a moment before her true nature emerged. She quickly masked her guilt with indignation, crossing her arms and glaring at me. "What the hell are you doing here, Dan?" she snapped, her voice sharp. "Are you seriously stalking me now? This is pathetic." I bit back my anger, keeping my tone calm. "Stalking? No, Emily, I'm just here to see how far my loving wife would go behind my back." Looks like I got my answer. Her eyes flicked nervously to Claudine, who stood a few feet away, arms crossed and seething with rage. Andre's attempts at damage control were laughable. "Claudine, my love, it's not what it looks like." "Oh, shut up, Andre," Claudine snapped, her French accent cutting through the tension. "You're lucky I don't set your precious restaurant on fire." As Claudine stormed off, leaving Andre stammering in her wake, Emily turned her venom back to me. "So, what's your plan, Dan? Humiliate me? Make me the villain here? She sneered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Newsflash. Maybe if you weren't so dull and predictable, I wouldn't have needed to find excitement elsewhere. Her words stung, but I refused to let her see it. You really think blaming me will change anything? You've been lying, cheating, and making me out to be a fool for months, Emily, I said, my voice steady. But don't worry, everyone will know the truth soon enough. Her expression faltered, but only for a second. Then she laughed, a cold, hollow sound. Oh, please, she said, rolling her eyes. Go ahead, Dan, play the victim. Tell the whole world how your wife dared to have a life outside of your boring little routine. See how far that gets you. Her audacity was almost impressive. Almost. I don't need to say anything, I replied calmly. The evidence speaks for itself. The texts, the photos, the recordings. You've given me everything I need. For the first time, real fear flickered across her face. Recordings? She repeated, her voice quieter now. That's right, I said, pulling out my phone and playing a snippet of her voice, laughing with Andre, mocking me. Her mouth tightened, her bravado faltering. But then, in true Emily fashion, she doubled down. You think this will ruin me? You don't know who you're dealing with, Dan, she hissed. If you even try to use any of that, I'll make your life a living hell. I'll take everything, this house, your money, everything you care about, and I'll make sure you never see a dime of peace. She wasn't bluffing, and we both knew it. Emily had a cruel streak she rarely showed outright, but when cornered, she was ruthless. You've already made my life hell, Emily, I said. And if you think I'm going to sit back and let you destroy everything, you're in for a rude awakening. As she stormed off to her car, I realized this wasn't over. Emily wasn't the type to back down, and her threats weren't empty. Over the next few days, she proved just how far she was willing to go. First, she emptied our joint bank account. By the time I checked it, the balance was a laughable $40. When I confronted her, she shrugged and said, I need to secure my future, Dan. You'll survive. You always do. Then came the smear campaign. Emily was always good at spinning stories to make herself look like the victim. She started telling anyone who would listen that I was a controlling, paranoid husband who drove her into Andre's arms. At first, I ignored it, but then mutual friends began calling me, asking if I'd really been emotionally abusive. The worst came when she tried to turn my own family against me. My mother called, worried, saying Emily had told her I'd been unstable and threatened her safety. I could hear the doubt in my mom's voice, but Emily's manipulations were clearly getting to her. She even went as far as showing up at my workplace one afternoon, tears in her eyes, and sobbed to my boss about how I'd lost control since our marriage fell apart. The pity in my coworker's eyes was unbearable, but worse was the thinly veiled warning from my boss to get my personal life in order. I was furious, but careful not to lose my cool. Emily wanted me to lash out, to give her something real she could use against me. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. Instead, I focused on building my case. With the help of a lawyer, I documented everything, her withdrawals, her false claims, and the evidence of her affair. If she wanted a war, I'd fight it on my terms. Meanwhile, Emily continued her antics. She flaunted her new relationship with Andre, posting pictures of their romantic dates online for all to see. The captions were sickeningly sweet. Finally found someone who truly appreciates me. What she didn't realize was that Andre wasn't as devoted as she thought. Behind the scenes, Claudine was dismantling his empire piece by piece. Lawsuits, bad press, and revoked business licenses were just the beginning. It was only a matter of time before Emily found herself caught in the fallout. But I wasn't waiting for karma to do the job. I had my own plans, and Emily was about to learn the hard way that her cruelty had consequences. Emily's arrogance seemed to know no bounds. After her dramatic smear campaign and financial sabotage, she began parading her new life in front of me. She would deliberately bring Andre to places she knew I frequented, my favorite coffee shop, the park where I jogged, even the hardware store I often visited for work supplies. It wasn't just cruel. It was calculated. One day, I was grabbing a cup of coffee before heading to a job site when they walked in. Emily, dressed to the nines in a red dress, clung to Andre's arm as if she were starring in some twisted romance film. She caught my eye and smirked, leaning into him with exaggerated intimacy. Dan, what a surprise, she said loudly. her voice dripping with false sweetness. I ignored her, but she wasn't done. Andre, this is Dan, my ex, she said, emphasizing the word with a theatrical sigh. I've told you so much about him. Andre gave me a smug smile and extended his hand. Dan and Emily has mentioned you. I didn't take his hand. Can't say the same about you, Andre, I said coolly before turning away. Emily's laughter followed me as I walked out the door, my blood boiling. At that moment, I realized she wasn't just trying to hurt me, she was trying to destroy me. And if that's the game she wanted to play, I was ready to match her move for move. I kept my head down, working tirelessly with my lawyer to finalize our divorce and expose the depths of her deceit. Emily, meanwhile, was blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her. Her relationship with Andre quickly became a source of gossip in the small social circles we shared. It turned out that Andre wasn't as loyal as he appeared. Claudine's lawsuits had taken a toll on him financially, and Emily's extravagant tastes weren't helping. It didn't take long before whispers of Andre's other affairs reached me. He wasn't just seeing Emily. He had at least 2 other women on the side. Knowing Emily's vanity and possessiveness, I decided to make sure she found out in the most public way possible. The opportunity came during a charity gala that Emily and Andre were attending. I hadn't been invited, of course, but I had a few connections in the event's planning committee. It wasn't hard to arrange for a little accident involving a series of photos I had gathered, photos of Andre cozying up to women who weren't Emily. The photos were printed and slipped into elegant, anonymous envelopes, each sealed with a note. Does this look like the man you trust? These were discreetly distributed to various guests at the gala, including Emily herself. Later that evening, I received a text from one of my contacts who was working the event. You should have seen her face when she opened the envelope. Priceless. I couldn't help but smile. Emily didn't confront me immediately, which was surprising. Instead, she went quiet for a few days, likely trying to piece together what had happened. When she finally showed up at my doorstep, her fury was palpable. You think you're clever, don't you? She hissed, shoving her way into my house, uninvited. Good to see you too, Emily, I said, leaning against the doorway. Don't play dumb, she snapped. You think exposing Andre will make you look like the hero? Pathetic. I shrugged. I didn't expose him. His actions did that. Did. She glared at me, her face flushed with anger. You're going to regret this, Dan. Mark my words. Regret what? Showing you the truth? If anything, you should be thanking me, I said with a smirk. Her face contorted with rage, but she didn't respond. Instead, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Over the next few weeks, Emily's life began to unravel. Andre, desperate to salvage his reputation in business, cut ties with her completely. He was seen publicly with one of his other flings, leaving Emily humiliated and alone. But she wasn't done with her games. She started spreading new rumors, this time claiming that I had fabricated the evidence against Andre. She told anyone who would listen that I was a bitter, jealous ex who couldn't handle her moving on. It worked on some people, but not everyone was fooled. By now, most of our mutual acquaintances had seen enough of Emily's true colors to take her words with a grain of salt. Still, I wasn't satisfied. I wanted her to face real consequences, not just social embarrassment. I began digging deeper into Emily's financial activities. With my lawyer's help, I discovered that she had been siphoning money from our joint account long before our marriage hit the rocks. Some of the transactions were even linked to questionable purchases under Andre's name, lavish gifts, hotel bookings, and more. Armed with this information, I filed a lawsuit against her for financial fraud. Emily was blindsided when she received the legal notice. How dare you? She screamed when she called me later that evening. How dare I? Emily, you stole from me, I said firmly. This isn't about revenge, it's about justice. Her voice wavered for the first time in weeks. You can't do this. You'll ruin me. No, Emily, you ruined yourself, I said, ending the call. The lawsuit hit her hard. Without Andre's support and with mounting legal fees, Emily began to spiral. Her arrogance faded, replaced by desperation. She started reaching out to friends and family for help, but most had distanced themselves after seeing how manipulative she had become. The final blow came when the court ruled in my favor. Emily was ordered to repay the stolen funds and cover my legal fees. It wasn't enough to completely ruin her, but it was a start. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Emily's downfall was satisfying, but I wasn't naive enough to think she'd give up without a fight. True to form, she resorted to her usual underhanded tactics. First, she tried to appeal to my emotions. She showed up at my house one evening looking disheveled and defeated, her eyes red from crying. "Dan," she began, her voice trembling, "I made mistakes. I know that now. Can we please just talk?" I stared at her, unimpressed. This wasn't the confident, manipulative Emily I'd come to expect. It was a performance, and not a very convincing one. "There's nothing to talk about," I said, my voice cold. "Please," she begged, stepping closer. "I'm losing everything. I can't handle this alone." Her words might have tugged at my heart once, but not anymore. "You should have thought about that before you lied, cheated, and stole," I replied, closing the door in her face. When the emotional angle didn't work, she escalated her attacks. I started receiving strange calls from potential clients who seemed hesitant to work with me. One finally admitted that someone had told them I was unreliable and involved in legal troubles. It didn't take long to trace the source back to Emily. She was spreading lies about my business, trying to sabotage the only thing she hadn't managed to touch during our marriage. Her pettiness only strengthened my resolve. I leaned into my network of loyal clients and friends, making sure they knew the truth. My reputation remained intact, while hers continued to crumble. The breaking point came a month later when I received a call from Emily's landlord. "Mr. Henderson, I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm trying to reach Emily," the landlord said hesitantly. "She doesn't live here anymore," I replied, confused. "That's just it. She's behind on rent and her phone's disconnected. I thought she might have moved back in with you." I couldn't help but laugh. "No, she hasn't." The landlord sighed. "Well, if you hear from her, let her know she has until the end of the month to pay, or she's out." It seemed Emily had finally hit rock bottom. A week later, she showed up at my door again, this time without the dramatics. She looked exhausted, her makeup smudged and her clothes wrinkled. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she said quietly. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "And that's my problem because—" "Dan, please," she said, her voice breaking. "I know I messed up, but you can't just abandon me." "Funny," I said, my tone dripping with sarcasm. "You didn't seem to mind abandoning me when you were playing house with Andre." Her face crumpled, but I wasn't buying it. "You're on your own, Emily," I said firmly. "You made your bed. Now lie in it." She didn't argue. For once, she just turned and walked away. As the weeks turned into months, Emily's name faded from my daily thoughts. I threw myself into my work, rebuilding the parts of my life she'd tried to destroy. Word eventually got back to me that she'd moved in with a distant relative in another state, working a low-paying job and trying to stay afloat. It wasn't the life she'd envisioned, I was sure of that. But for me, it was finally over. One day, while cleaning out the garage, I found an old box filled with photos and mementos from our marriage. I hesitated for a moment, then threw it into the trash. The past was behind me. It was time to focus on the future, and this time I wouldn't let anyone like Emily darken my doorstep again.